Well, this is going to be a real fun discussion. A lot of folks have been telling me I've got to speak to this gentleman that I have with me now. He is Joel Salatin, who is really a great voice in our culture for regenerative agriculture. He describes himself as a Christian libertarian and environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer, which sounds like exactly the kind of folks we need to talk to. And so I really appreciate you joining me, Joel. How you doing?
I'm doing well, David. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you.
Well, it's going to be fun, and a lot of folks have been asking me to speak with you for some time, and one in particular, Jefferson Slinkard is a longtime listener of our show. He's a farmer in Arkansas, and he's a big fan of your work, and he kept being persistent and sending me links to your blog, saying you've got to talk to him. He's right up your alley about what you're talking about. So I said, all right, we're going to make it happen, and I'm really thankful that you joined me.
Thank you. Great.
So your farm, let's start out with folks who are not familiar with what you're doing. You have been in all these different documentaries. You have become kind of a hero for a lot of folks in the environmental movement, in the regenerative agriculture, the localist movement. You got a lot of fans who are on the left and fans on the right, but you're kind of your own thing, as you described yourself as. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing. Your farm is called Polyface Farms.
Yes. Well, we put the name Polyface because we knew that we were going to be very diversified. We were going to do a lot of different things. And at the time, my dad was still living, and he was an accountant, and so we wanted such a broad name that we could run services and products and everything, through this. And of course, he's passed away now, but I do a lot of consulting and traveling and speaking. So of course, we run that through the company as well. The point is the less I exist, the better. That's the reason for a business. You can also a lot of tax advantages and bleeding off using before tax dollars for other things. Anyway, so I came back to I grew up here. I'm second generation. Dad and mom never made a living from the farm. Dad was an accountant, mom was a school teacher, but they used the off-farm jobs to pay for the farm. We came in 1961 when I was only 4, and I grew up here, and it was essentially a glorified homestead. My dad's father was an early subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine back in like 1949. And so Dad grew up with this kind of ecological bent. And so, I grew up going to conservative church circles, but our reading material was everything from the Free Man to Mother Earth News. and I got this wonderful eclectic blend of our farm friends were, we could smell marijuana on their breath. They were hippies, beaded, bearded, braless hippies, and that was our farm friends. Then we had these straight-laced church friends, and I just thought that was normal. I mean, okay, so the world's a big place with lots of different ideas. And it wasn't until later that I realized the tension between these two camps. And anyway, I came back to the farm full time in September 24, 1982. Teresa and I got married. We made an apartment up in the attic. We lived on about $300 a month, drove a $50 car, grew all of our own food, and devoted ourselves here. The farm was paid for, but there was no business. And so we basically launched Polyface at that time, saying we want to have a business here on the farm. We don't want this to be a glorified homestead. And so we began that process, and we started direct marketing. We built up a customer base. It gradually grew. We didn't use chemicals. This is, back in the 80s. We were still pretty early on in that, kind of food awareness genre. We did a lot of composting. We healed the land. We filled in gullies. We built ponds. We cultivated our customers some more. And to make a long story short, today we do beef, pork, chicken, both eggs and meat, turkey, rabbit, duck, and we market to about 5,000, maybe 6,000 families. We ship across the nation to people who want good food. And until COVID, we served about 50 restaurants, but only about maybe of those 50, maybe 20 are going to survive. The rest of them will be out of business. And so we don't serve as many restaurants anymore, but the contactless retail shipping has kind of taken up a lot of the slack in those retail. And another thing that I think is important to just point out that we do is a little bit unusual is we have a very formal apprenticeship program. So we mentor young people, and we've been doing that for about 25 years and launching these young people as full-time farmers. And that's some of our most, it's some of our most important work now, but it's also some of our most, it takes the most amount of energy to, keep the relationships good. And, you bring these young people in from different backgrounds around the country, throw them in a dorm situation, and, they live together, eat together, work together. And you either develop love real fast or you develop resentment real fast. And so there's a lot of effort, in us massaging that relational dynamics on the farm.
Very interesting. So, and that's not too far. You're in Virginia, right?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
So how far are you away from the DC area, the whole?
Yeah, so we can be on the White House steps from here in a little under three hours.
So it looks like you've got something like the Shire from the Lord of the Rings. So you're real close to Mordor, though. You're right down the road,
huh? Or very close to the septic tank, whichever way you wanna talk about it.
Well, now, so you've been featured in a lot of films, and then when you search your name, you find so many different things going on. You've got a fan base that goes around the world to look at what you're doing. What is it about what you guys have done that has caught the attention? Because there's a lot of folks, right now, localism is trendy still, and getting regenerative agriculture, that's a term that's starting to develop. What is it about what you guys have done? Or your story? Is it the method of your farming practices? What has seemingly, caught on that you've become a farm that a lot of people all over the world are looking at? What is that?
Yeah, well, I think there's several things. Initially, what was exciting was here was this young couple. We didn't have a Swiss bank account. We didn't have wealthy parents. I mean, we were just, middle class. And here on this small farm, Teresa and I carved out a full-time, income living on this small farm, direct marketing. So, there are a lot of people who would love to be self-employed in an agrarian setting, but they've been told it can't be done. It's too hard. You can't do it on a small acreage. You need a whole bunch of, equity, a bunch of money that you can blow through, all that stuff. So that was the initial thing that attracted people. Well, then people started saying, well, how do you do this? Well, fortunately, David, I was groomed. Looking back now on my life, I realized I was absolutely divinely groomed to be a communicator. My dad used to tell the story when he and mom went to a PTA meeting when I was in third grade. So third grade, that'd be 9 years old. So they go and the teacher meets mom and dad and she realizes who they are. And she just tells my dad, she says, Mr. Salatin, you have no secrets. So obviously I was telling stories, early on. And so God gifted me with an ability to communicate both verbally and written. I entered essay contests, American, like the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution essay contest on Americanism. And back in those days, Senator Strom Thurmond, you may remember Strom Thurmond he had an essay contest. I don't think I ever entered an essay contest that I didn't win. So I had this gift. And then in high school, I worked at the local newspaper, wrote obituaries and police reports and things like that. And under these two crusty copy editors, I want that copy in in 30 minutes, get it to me, on a manual typewriter. And so what I'm getting at is that our gift of communication across these mediums was like rocket fuel to the story. It was a compelling story that people enjoyed, but one of the things that separated us was our ability to communicate it. And so I began writing columns, writing books. About my 15th book. So I've got book number 15 is coming out here in about another month. And in general, the people who know how to communicate and verbalize a message are the ones who lead the movement. That's just kind of across the board, whatever it is. And so that's not. And I would say the third thing that's really captured imagination is that we do so many things. We're not just cattle farmers. We're not just chicken farmers. We actually do, beef, pork, chicken, turkey, rabbit, duck, and we have a lot of forestry. We mill lumber. We sell boards, and so that eclectic, broad dimension of the many different things has captured attention, and it all moves. It's all portable and movable. So there's a lot of dimensions to that. But we're unique. I think we're unique in then the number of animals, in the different kinds of things that we do. We're unique in the protocols that we use, the complex relationships that we link up together. We're unique in our ability to communicate it, and I think that we're unique in that we're at this point we're now old dogs in the fight. We've been at this literally multi-generationally, and so now one of the things that excites people is our son has taken over day-to-day operations. So this whole idea of succession and family legacy, and how do you create a family business that the kids want to be a part of, and add in perpetuity to have a family business without getting angry at each other and flying apart. That's now a new dimension. That's so we have 4 generations on the farm. My mom is she's an active 97 years old, and then Teresa and I, and then our son Daniel. We got 3 grandchildren, 13, 15, and 17, and so we've got 4 generations living on the farm. And there are a lot of people that would covet that kind of familial, functionality, if you will.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that a lot of the way the industrial farming system is designed, it doesn't cultivate communication skills amongst farmers, because there's so many different middle people in the middle of the distribution model, right? Of factory farming, where you've got the separation between the farmer and the distributor, and then you've got the lobbyist. All the lobbyist is speaking for the farmer, the distributor is speaking for the farmer, the packing house, all these different things are speaking for the farmer. The farmer doesn't get to really have a voice directly to the people, does he, in that sense?
Well, I think that's true. Although I would say in general, as a vocation, farming has not attracted great. I mean, even historically, peasants, they were not great communicators. I mean, farming in many ways is a fairly lonely business. You're out here in the field, and you've got a lot of think time, and you've got a lot of alone time, but it tends to, I think, as a vocation, it tends to attract people that aren't team builders, that don't cultivate, communication as an asset. And so when you find a farmer who's also a great communicator, that's a real unusual combination.
That's like Thomas Jefferson and Wendell Berry.
Well, exactly.
Few,
yeah.
right?
Well, but back in those days, to your point, and I agree with you, that back in those days, farmers, those plantation owners, and I don't mean this to be racial or anything, but those George Washington, George Madison, George Mason, Thomas Jefferson, those large farmers in that day were the equivalent of our CEOs of Fortune 500 companies today. I mean, that was the economic engine of the culture at that time. Right. It's no longer the economic engine, but back then it was. So it tended to attract the best, brightest, well-educated, the sharpest knives in the box were attracted to it. Whereas today, farming has been marginalized Nobody, I'll tell you this, nobody can remember going into their high school guidance counselor as a rising senior, and the guidance counselor looks at their SAT scores and their whatever, their high school resume and says, wow, Jane, you're really, really smart. I think you should be a farmer. Nobody says that. If it's dull, dull David, okay, you're making C's. Well, you might want to be a farmer. But if you're making A's and B's, you probably ought to go be, a white collar. And we even say white collar blue. There's been a marginalization of trades and vocations. This is why people love, Michael Rowe, I think.
Yeah.
Dirty jobs.
Yeah.
People love him because he speaks for, so many people who feel marginalized in our techno sophisticated culture.
Yeah. And that's definitely a major factor. But I think it's interesting when you brought up the idea of well, it reminds me of what Bill Kaufman, he's a writer, and he wrote a book called Ain't My America, which is the long history of the anti-war tradition of heartland America against empire, against this, and this idea that our betrayal of our Christian teaching about what is a just war and when is it appropriate to go off and have self-defense, that betrayal of that principle has led to America dabbling with the foundations of empire for a long time. And part of becoming an empire, and this is why I have problems with nationalism as a final solution, as the here's where we need to go. I don't like the idea of nationalism. I think nationalism is a good tool when we're dealing with globalism, but I don't think nationalism is the end goal of where we want to go. I think we need to go closer to home, because nationalism is just kind of like proto-imperialism or proto-globalism. The idea that America used to be distinguished in its localities. It used to have local culture and local, fondness and storytelling. And all of that has been flattened out for a kind of mushy national identity that kind of flattens out all the distinctions between the different communities, and including the different foods, the different products that people make agriculturally, the different landscapes. And so I think we have bought into this kind of rootlessness that's infected us. And Bill Kaufman, the writer, he says, we even attack localism in the way we think about success. If we say, like you said, oh, that kid's going somewhere, he's going to leave where he's at, and that
Right.
means he's going to succeed. And if you say someone's not going to succeed, you say that guy's not going anywhere, meaning he's going to be stuck in his hometown. And that's an interesting thing, is that the more we've abandoned our local identity, we have subsumed a kind of corporate, rootless national identity that really doesn't bind us together, because it doesn't have anything of something that you can actually base in reality. Because you're everything in your local school is just a district of DC. Everything in your local government is a district of DC. It's imperial.
Right. Oh, you're speaking my language. I mean, one of the distinctives of the American experiment was the 50-state experiment. I mean, the 50-state experiment where maybe one state says, hey, education is not a government responsibility. We're not going to tax you for it. We're not going to pay you for it. You go find your own education and educate your own kids however you want to. Another state over here says, well, we think it's a government, a societal imperative to make sure kids get educated. So we're going to pay for it, but we're just going to give you vouchers and you can spend them wherever you want to. And then another state over here says, not only do we think it's a government imperative, we're going to have government schools and compel everyone to attend a government school. Well, there's three experiments that people could look over and see, well, how's that working over there? Who's the psychologist? How's that working out for you? Right.
Yeah.
And we could look around to see, the different kinds of things that people are doing. So you have 50 simultaneous experiments. Our problem, one of our big problems in our culture, is we have arrogated to the federal level things that were supposed to be done at the state and local level. And as a result, as a result, the disagreements that we have, rather than being smaller communities of disagreement, within a community or a state, instead now those elements of disagreement are for all the stakes. It's all the marbles, and so that makes the stakes way higher, which makes the volume higher. It makes the loser really a loser, a bigger loser, and the winner a bigger winner. And so if I would like to see the federal drop by about 90%, and all of that come back to the state level, at least the state level, if not a lot of it local level. And then we could actually have these ongoing experiments and be able to decide what works better in one area and what works better in another. And we wouldn't have the winner take all partisanship that we have right now, where we have so much interventive manipulation from the federal level.
Yeah, it's winner takes all, and that's the
right.
problem with this federalization and nationalization, rather, of our entire situation, is that it's winner takes all. So everybody is in a fight to the death to get a hold of that political power in the presidential election. The president has way more power than they ever imagined them to have. And the federal government has way more power. So it's winner takes all. And so politics is supposed to be a replacement for warfare, but when it becomes so winner takes all, it breaks down and it starts to feel like warfare. And that's why we're seeing dueling protests in the streets, where it's getting, and you get all this violence starting to spill out, because if politics is not believable, it's like a dam. It breaks out, and what breaks out? The crowd surges back out. It's like a roaring crowd. And if the state is not believable, and if it can't bind people together, it will break and the dam will burst. The crowd comes out, and that's where we're starting to see in our discourse today.
Sure. Well, James Dale Davidson, one of my favorite prophetic iconic books, James Dale Davidson wrote The Sovereign Individual back when
I've had him on my show a few times. Yeah, he's a friend.
Man.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I mean, what a great, he founded the National Taxpayers Union, but anyway, in The Sovereign Individual, he, his whole point in that book is that the political nation state as we know it is a fabrication, and that as things progress, we're going to see a breakup of that, and a reemergence of tribalism. But tribalism will not be by genealogy. Tribalism will be by belief. And so today, as we approach, you hit the nail on the head, as the government becomes unbelievable, many of us, and what we're seeing is a tsunami of people on the conservative side, the libertarian side, who are trying to do anything possible to become unattached or disengaged, if you will, disengaged from what we see as the system, whether that system is mandatory vaccinations or mandatory healthcare or mandatory education or mandatory investment control, the 50 pages of material you have to sign to get a bank loan. So we're trying to create a completely parallel universe, if you will, a parallel universe, along the order of Rod Drewer's Benedictine option.
Yeah.
That says, all right, look, if you guys want to play that game, you go ahead and play that game, but we're going to try to circle the wagons and create a self-reliant a community over here that doesn't depend on pharmaceuticals, that doesn't depend on all this other stuff, and we can do that. And in many ways, on our farm, that's exactly what we've developed over the years. Not necessarily. We didn't sit down and have a focus group kumbaya session to determine this. It just, as we continued to try to do more for ourselves and invest relationally, so that we surround ourselves with people who know how to grow things, build things, and fix things. We now have this very broad, eclectic community that grows everything from honey and produce and maple syrup to beef and pork and chicken, knows how to butcher it, knows how to freeze it, knows how to can it, knows how to cook it, and fix all the machinery. We have a full-time mechanic, we have a full-time maintenance tech that can build everything, fix anything. We can rebuild engines. That's all within our umbrella community. And we can't pull the plug on society, but I'll tell you what, it makes you feel really good every time you can disengage another level. That's a fun feeling.
Yeah, and if people were eating your kind of food that you're growing on your farm rather than eating what the government subsidizes with their taxpayer dollars, a lot of people wouldn't be sick like they are today. A lot of people wouldn't have had a hard time dealing with COVID. A lot of people wouldn't have had heart disease. The American Heart Association is still pushing quackery, nonsense, pseudoscience garbage, telling people they need to remove butter and animal fats that people ate for thousands and thousands of years and switch over to this experimental non-food called seed oils, these vegetable oils. I was just looking at the American Heart Association website. They have a black bean burger recipe that calls for, I believe, 3 to 4 tablespoons of corn oil and 3 tablespoons of canola oil or something. I mean, to put it in perspective, 5 tablespoons of corn oil, it takes 96 ears of corn to produce. So they're creating a Frankenstein disaster.
Yeah.
They have no basis to do this. And this one size fits all imperial mindset. There is one American Heart Association, also backed by Crisco, brought to you by Crisco. That's what they were started with, the support of Procter and Gamble. Procter and Gamble took that know-nothing American Heart Association. They didn't even barely have an office. They were a know-nothing, irrelevant group. And Procter and Gamble said, hey, we'll put you on all the radio in the 1950s, but you're going to have to push Crisco as the thing that's good for your heart. At the time, Dwight D. Eisenhower was smoking cigarettes like a chimney. And they said, hey, you know why he had that heart problem? It was his butter. He's eating his steaks and butter. So he said, how about Crisco, the oil of the future, right? And then the rest was history. They scapegoated what you sell, which is cattle and beef fat, butter, right. And they scapegoated that for the sins of smoking too much. And then once eventually big tobacco got exposed, heart diseases started going up again because they had switched everybody starting in the 80s and 90s. It really started skyrocketing to vegetable oils. And that's what we have. We have heart disease. We have all these things. I just saw a paper today, Unilever, which is the guys behind Breyers and Ben & Jerry's and all this stuff. Unilever had a paper where they were monkeying with the data to make it look like there wasn't a connection between the consumption of vegetable oils and diabetes. Again, if we were eating the way your farm raises food, we wouldn't have the diabetes skyrocket rates. We wouldn't have the heart disease rates. We wouldn't have the cancer rates. We could be eating animal fats as our primary source of fuel. So it's a big mess.
Well, it is a big mess. And of course, that's one reason why the Weston A. Price Foundation, founded by Sally Fallon and Dr. Tom Cowan, has had such tremendous success worldwide in reawakening and understanding of the nutritional benefits of ancestral diets. Weston A. Price was a dentist who traveled the world in the 1930s and looking for indigenous cultures that routinely had people live healthy up to 100 years old. And he was looking for what are the common threads of these indigenous communities that have these very, very elderly, healthy elderly people. In other words, they would live up to say 100, and then they would die quickly. That tip over point. In America, we die slowly. We die piece by piece by piece, and there's this 10-year prolonged, whatever it is, but in these ancient cultures, generally people went from functionality to dead in just a month. I'm done, right? and that's the way it was done. Anyway, he looked at these and the commonalities, and they were primarily eating animals, but the animals were a lot of seafood if you're along the beach, along the ocean, but animals, but remember the animals didn't eat grain, or not much, they were pastured, they were outside, they got sunlight. There's all sorts of things that happen with hormones and pituitary glands and all sorts of things, when sunlight comes in, and they moved around. They didn't stay in one house. They moved around. They weren't on their own toilet, and so you had a real different kind of all the grains that were eaten were all fermented. So there was kimchi and sourdough and things like that. And the point is that the commonality was, they didn't have sugar, they didn't have corn syrup, and they certainly didn't have Pop-Tarts and Little Debbie's ho-ho cakes. And you start looking at and in those cultures, as soon as Western food came into those cultures, immediately you had all of the diabetes, the heart disease, crooked teeth, all sorts of issues, cancer, as a result of the Western diet. So, diet isn't everything, but it is foundational, and it's certainly one thing to put attention on.
Yeah, you are what you eat, right?
Right, and you are what you eats. So one of the critical things right now in farming is that we've done everything. I mean, we as a culture, we have done everything possible to turn biology into mechanics, and so we don't view life as fundamentally biological. We view life as fundamentally mechanical, and so chemical fertilizers, are completely inanimate, inert. As opposed to, say, a compost pile, which is full and brimming with life, and then you have all your herbicides, your pesticides, all the chemicals, and then now, of course, we're rearranging DNA, and now we're giving a DNA experimental. I don't call it a vaccine. I call it a toxin for people to experiment with gene therapy within their own cells. And so all of this is essentially looking at biology as if it's an inanimate mechanical thing that like parts of an engine that we can take apart and put back together. And that is all I think creates within the persona an idea that we can have life without death. We can fabricate life out of substance, and the fact is everything is eating and being eaten. That's how everything lives. And if you don't believe it, go lie naked in your flower bed for 3 days and see what gets eaten.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the life, death, decomposition, regeneration, life, death, decomposition, regeneration. I mean, that's there can be no life without sacrifice. It's one of the most foundational spiritual and environmental principles there is. And it's beautiful to be able to take that biological principle. How does biology work? It works with something dying, something being eaten, and then transformed into something else. That's the way biology works. So I can go to an elementary school class and say that's also a life principle. If you really want to live, if you really want to be successful in life, you sacrifice yourself. You become a servant. You serve, and that's where you get the greatest life benefit and satisfaction. They're one and the same.
Yeah, and that's why it's when you do evil is not just right and wrong. Evil is what's real and what's not real. And to me,
Right.
that goes back to a teaching that's been going on for a long time in the church, was the idea of sin being that which is a fantasy. It's a shortcut to heaven that leads to hell. So you think you're going to a heavenly design. Oh, we're going to save everybody from COVID, but you're taking a shortcut. Oh, let's get an obscene profit margin product that's patented, of course, rather than understand the immune system, get people off of vegetable oils, processed flour, processed sugar, take care of their health, use things that are generic drugs, use things that are natural, supplements, dietary changes, and you can actually have more robust healing. When you take a shortcut to heaven, it always leads to hell. Robert Malone, who's a medical doctor, he's the inventor of mRNA vaccines and RNA as a drug. Here's what he tweeted out just a couple days ago. What happens to confidence in public health in the U.S. government if ivermectin turns out to be safe and effective for COVID and the genetic vaccines turns out to have significant safety issues? This looks like a very plausible scenario from where I sit. That's the man who invented mRNA vaccines, medical doctor.
Wow, is that right?
Yeah.
So in other words, just to understand what you just said, it sounds like he's not quite as confident on his invention as you would like to hear him be.
Yeah, and he's not necessarily the inventor of these vaccines. He's the inventor of the concept in the general sense, and he's now speaking out about how these particular products, based on his original invention, may not be being done in a scientific way in terms of their rollout, to put it mildly. Ivermectin is a generic drug people have been talking about. You're probably familiar with it, right? You see that in the agricultural world.
Yes.
And you know, people are trying to flood into America over our border. But I tell people, if you're in Mexico City, apparently your government cares more about your safety and health than our government, because the Mexico City government provided ivermectin for people who had COVID early on. And they had a significant reduction. So you might want to come back to Mexico City because they probably care about your health, because you will never hear Biden or anybody in DC tell you that a generic drug that doesn't have a profit obscene margin that's patented, that you're never going to have them tell you to take a generic drug, except for Trump. And we found out what happened when you say that, you know,
right. And, or even a couple of capsules of vitamin D. Vitamin D is a huge deterrent. You know, there are so many alternative treatments to this. I mean, let's not impugn the fact that, I mean, COVID is a real thing. I don't want to get in a rabbit trail about, is COVID significant? Is it not significant? Or, you know, what is it? But for sure, the alternative therapies have been well documented, and this experiment that we have is, I think it's going to have a long tail physically, and it's going to have a long tail geopolitically, in seeing how far people will go to be shepherded and corralled in thought and practice.
And I would just say it's not the alternative. They're the alternative fringe theory, because the human history, we didn't have seed oils. In the Frontiers in Physiology, they published a paper, peer-reviewed paper by Professor Bruce Hammock and Bruce German, both of whom we had on the show recently. And they've been looking at what vegetable oils, canola, corn, soybean, safflower, sunflower, these common oils that are found in all restaurant foods primarily. They're found in all the processed foods. They looked at severe COVID patients, and they found that every one of them that had this ARDS, which is the acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is what kills people most of the time with COVID, that those who had that had a high amount of leukotoxin stored in their body. Leukotoxin is caused by one thing alone: the consumption of linoleic acid, which is the oil that people are getting when they eat vegetable oils on a regular basis. It's the only thing that bioaccumulates in the body. And so this bioaccumulation of seed oils, thanks to our government, starting with Ancel Keys, who was propped up and he started demonizing, products like what you have, animal fats, butter in the 50s and 60s. They paraded them around on Time magazine. Here's the oil of the future. We got to get PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids, these vegetable oils in our diet, and replace the beef, the butter, and so forth with these vegetable oils. And that's what's causing the severe COVID cases. And so they're the fringe. They're the alternative theory. We're not the alternative. We are representing the vast majority of what humans all over the world prefer to eat, which is ancestral diets when they can have access to it. And we are representing the way human bodies were meant to be for the vast, vast majority of human history. Vegetable oils have only caught on in the last century. They're the blip on the radar, and they will be indicted by history. History will indict these people for creating a mass experiment by introducing vegetable oils, giving bogus guidelines for our health, and then running farmers like what you're trying to do into the corners to try to ostracize ancestral eating. They're the fringe.
Yeah, that's a fascinating analysis. I concur. I concur completely. What a lot of people don't realize is that all the vegetables oils come from annuals, annual grains, annual seeds, and until mechanization in agriculture, until we had the combine and the tillage and the John Deere tractor, it was so difficult to grow grains, to grow seeds, annuals, because it required tillage. You had to till up the sod or whatever, and when you're doing that with a sharp stick, or you're doing it with a crude stick behind a water buffalo or a team of mules, a person can't do but just a few square yards a day. But now, with cheap energy and mechanics, we can do a lot of it. And so this option was not even available to humankind until extremely recently. And so as we have moved into this chemical industrial complex in our agriculture, we now have the freedom to do things that we've never been able to do before, not the least of which is put animals, confine animals in a factory farm and bring them feedstocks from around the world and haul their manure out. Look, when you were in 1910, metropolitan newspapers were all predicting the demise of the city because they were all covered in poop. I mean, there was horse manure everywhere. In fact, during Charles Dickens' day, in the 1840s and 50s in London, children that wanted to earn some money would stand on street corners with a broom, and businessmen would give them a couple shillings to go with a broom and clean the street in front of them, so they didn't walk in through all the horse manure. But horse manure was taken into the flower shop and the newspaper office and it was everywhere. And when of course came the automobile, and that was done. But with the internal combustion engine and then oil and cheap energy, came the ability for the first time to actually concentrate animals at such magnitude in such proximity, because now your ability to transport feedstocks in and transport waste out were greatly, it was much larger. Back when everything was by animal power, you simply couldn't have that much concentration of animals in one place. It had to be decentralized. It had to be spread out across the landscape, and that blessed the landscape with the manure and all these the things. All that became a blessing. Today, with a segregated system rather than an integrated system, we've been able to do such concentrations that what has historically always been a blessing of fertility has become a liability of toxicity. Mm-hmm. And so we have inverted the entire ecological, as related to agriculture, we've inverted the entire ecological balance sheet, so that everything that used to be a blessing is now a curse, and everything that used to be an asset is now a liability. And a lot of people think, well, we can't turn back. I mean, your system could never feed the world, it could never feed people. But I can assure you, on our farm, and I can go into detail if you want, but we are far more productive than any farm that I know. However you want to do it, production of nutrition, production per pound per acre. I don't care how you want to cut it, but it's management and tight, intricate, complex relationships, and you get this symbiotic. It should give everybody pause, David, to realize that 500 years ago, 500 years ago, North America produced more pounds of animal. North America had more pounds of animal on it than it does today, even with factory farms, the population, and and all the pets. Had more. It fed and produced more pounds of animal 500 years ago than it does today. So that should give you a lot of. I mean, that right there is enough to make you question all of the orthodox, all of the chemical industrial complex orthodoxy of today. That's all based on scarcity, manipulation, and adulteration of the system, of nature's system.
So let's deal with that question since you brought it up, because we've had, again, I had those professors on from UC Davis, and they have been studying linoleic acid, which is the primary bad fat that people are getting when they eat vegetable oils as their primary fat fuel instead of the oils that your animals contain in their animal, steaks and so forth, ground beef. So the whole world was shifted away from, and has been continually shifted away from ancestral fats, saturated fats, coconut oil, these normal fats that are natural. And they've shifted over to corn oil, soybean oil. You can't squeeze soybean oil and get oil out like you can't squeeze corn and get oil out. It's an unnatural process, like you were describing. And it's been a mass experiment. And so they were talking about how, look at what happened to India. India's got skyrocketing diabetes. They've got a difficult time with COVID in some cases. They've got problems with other diseases that are plaguing them. And it's because they've been eating a lot of the seed oils that our Western countries kind of pushed onto them, acting like we're the, experts of the world. We're not only the world's policeman, we're also the world's diet coach, apparently. We've been telling everybody what to do about everything. And it's causing a calamitous effect, suffering, like you said, slow dying. It's unnatural. So the question that they said was, well, we don't think, because I said, well, how do we get a country like India with 1 billion people to switch back to what they were eating before we screwed up their life? Hey, we know what to do. Eat seed oils. That's how you'll stop from starvation. So it's a cheap oil. You can all eat it. You can all afford it. And they said, well, I don't think we could, and so I want you as a farmer to address that question. Can we feed the whole world, not just the yuppies and the upper middle class folks that want to buy the local trendy local chicken and local steak, the local farmer, that's a trendy thing, Whole Foods, but can we actually feed the entire world with your model of agriculture? That's the big question.
Yeah, so not only can we, but it's the only thing that will. So let's just address India for a moment. A lot of people don't realize that half of the food imported to India is eaten at the dock, is eaten by sacred rats. So, and they've got sacred. And listen, I'm not trying to demean India. I'm not trying to be hateful to Hindus or Buddha. What I am trying to say is these issues are not just, can we grow food? A lot of times they're. I mean, in the U.S., we throw away almost 50% of the human available food because it's there's something, maybe a slight blemish. I mean, there was a guy I talked with. He was coming out of Zimbabwe,
mm-hmm.
and he'd just been at a green bean factory that was exporting green beans from Zimbabwe up to the European Union, up to Europe. And he said, we pack 2 tons a day and we throw away 2 tons a day. I said, well, why do you throw away 2 tons a day? You're throwing away half of it. He said, well, they're too long, they're too short, they're too fat, they're too thin, they're not straight enough. There's nothing nutritionally wrong with it. It just doesn't quite fit the box. And so at the outset, it's important for us to realize that for the first time in human history, nearly half of the human edible food produced on the planet is being thrown away. And unlike our ancestors who threw away food to the animals, the chickens and the pigs that were, right near the homestead and the nearby to salvage it as animal food, we landfill it. We don't even use it for anything. We don't feed anything with it. And so So the throwaway is huge. So that's one big issue, and the throwaway can be everything from from sell-by dates to inadequate roads through a pass in Pakistan that it's just too unhandy for the truck to get through. I mean, there's any number of those kinds of things, socio-economic, geopolitical type of things. But from a simple production standpoint, what we need to do is look at nature's template. So here's the basic template of nature. Number one, carbon doesn't move very far. And so everything runs on carbon. So we need to be thinking about how we produce, store, and utilize carbon, whether it's grass, trees, wood chips, forests, whatever it is. Think about carbon. Number two, nature doesn't like to have naked soil. So we need to make sure that we have something on the soil that's growing. Number three, animals move. Animals don't stay in one place. They're carefully choreographed with predation, flies, monsoon rains, seasonality. It's a choreograph to make these animals mobile, to make them move, and the predators keep them mobbed up. And so they're moving, mobbing, and mowing. And when we duplicate that, for example, on our farm, we've been doing that with high-tech electric fencing for many decades. We get 5 times the production on our perennial prairie pastures. We get 5 times the production of our county average. And we've never bought a seed or bought a bag of chemical fertilizer, because moving, mobbing, mowing actually stimulates the production of biomass. There was a fascinating, so in a lot of these third world countries, and I'm not trying to be condescending, I'm just trying to use terminology so that we all understand what we're talking about. In these third world countries, they are extremely resource rich, but they're just like it, but they're not managing, for example, the domestic stock. So you could go, for example, to a village in Indonesia that's got pigs and chickens running through the squat pots and under the thatch houses, through the sewers and the streets. You could go to that same village, and with an electric fence energizer and a little bit of electric netting, you could confine those animals and move them each day around that village, and suddenly they would be on, you would have rest from pathogens, the animals would be healthy, you'd have vegetation, because animals wouldn't just run willy-nilly and eat every little morsel every time it gets a smidgen of green to it. Instead, the grass would have a chance to actually grow up before the animals came on it. And so, we have the technology, but in our domestic livestock, we've got to mimic this moving, mobbing, mowing choreography of nature, or it just turns into a desert, which is, of course, what we see around the world. And we see it, of course, in India as well. And so those are just principles: carbon, movement, multi-speciation, symbiosis. And then I would just conclude with the idea of hydration. We need to be hydrating the landscape. 500 years ago, North America had 200 million beavers and 8% water coverage on the landscape. Today, we're less than 4% water coverage. And so we have depleted more than half of our surface water, which acts as a buffer to ambient temperatures. It stimulates transo-evaporation. It stimulates biodiversity within the landscape, and it creates buffers to flooding, buffers to droughts, all of that. And so on our farm, we have a very active multi-year pond building strategy. We don't have the beavers anymore, but we do have excavators that we can go into ravines and valleys, and we can excavate not great big dams, but little dams, lots of little dams, ponds that we can use for irrigation in a drought, and double the production of biomass, make sure the earthworms stay happy even in a drought, grow grass, capture more solar energy, to grow more biomass, to feed more soil biology, to make more, it's all a synergistic thing of abundance rather than a depletionary thing towards scarcity.
So, two questions. Do we have enough available acreage that we could switch people over to your model of regenerative agriculture? And two, what is there enough profit so that the farmer who's in India who's just saw your blog, I mean, or this appearance on my show, or the farmer in Florida, where a lot of our radio audience is, and they're saying, it sounds interesting what he's doing, but Monsanto or these other conventional methods are saying you don't got to go all the way with what he's doing. He's being artistic. He's being, romantic. He's being poetic. That's all cool. You can do a little bit of that, but build it with the conventional stuff and do a little bit, but not a lot. So what would you say to the folks that are saying, I'll do a little bit of something what you're doing here, but I'm not going to go all the way because the margin for my family is more important than making a statement.
Yeah, great. Well, so I'll say a couple things. Number one, first of all, it definitely can work anywhere in the world. I mean, with obviously climatized and customized adaptations within a certain area. I mean, just like I don't grow pineapples and bananas, okay? But somebody in Belize, might not grow something that I would grow. So there are certainly local issues, but the principle, all these principles are worldwide. Everything runs on carbon. It runs on animal movement. Those kind of principles are ubiquitous in the entire world. Now, as far as making little changes are fine. Incremental changes are fine. But I can tell you that if you want big changes, you've got to go 180 degrees. It's not good enough to make little changes. So I mean that's the problem with organic certification. Organic certification it now has organic factory farms. So they say, well, we'll have a factory farm, but instead of having our chicken density at half a square foot per chicken, we'll have 2 square feet per chicken. Well, the problem is, that still doesn't get you to a healthy, to a really healthy system. It might help some, but it's not really. It doesn't give you to the nutrition. It doesn't get you the nutrition that the true, pastured exercise and things like that get you. And so we do grow seasonally. So we depend on freezers and canning and things like that to go off season. So the ability to build soil and grow soil and ensure abundance biologically. Here's the thing. The biological approach to soil health and soil abundance really came as a gift to us from an Englishman named Sir Albert Howard, whose iconic book, An Agricultural Testament, was released to the world in 1943, and for the first time introduced to the world on a broad scale the scientific basis of composting. The formula, the carbon, nitrogen, microbes, moisture, and oxygen, kind of the five ingredient recipe of composting. Well, of course, 1943, the world was involved in a great big conflagration called World War II, which required a lot of ammunition, which is made from nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. So post-World War II, we had these massive stockpiles of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And of course, we started down the path earlier than that of what a chemical approach could do. I mean, Justus von Liebig in Austria in 1837 used vacuum tubes and he got the Nobel Prize for telling the world that that all of life is simply nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus in different ratios, everything. And so he really brought to the world in 1837 this notion that really all of life is just a mechanical thing. We just got to, figure out the ratios and it'll be like bearings in a car and pistons in an engine. And this gradually moved forward into the 1930s and 40s with chemical fertilizer development, which really took off after World War II as a salvage operation for all these stockpiles of ammunition. By that time, we had the World War II got us, the cheap mining, the ability to make these chemicals easily, make these substances easily. So, post World War II, you're a farmer, you might have lost a son in World War II in battle. You're now at home. You're 50 years old. You've been shoveling all your life. And somebody brings you a little bag of 10, 5, 10 NPK and says, hey, you can just put this little bag on and you'll be fine. And so they did large, by large. And what Sir Albert Howard brought to the world in his composting approach that he learned in India, called the indoor method, what he brought to the world required a lot more shoveling of carbon and handling carbon. We didn't have front end loaders on tractors. We didn't have plastic pipe yet. We didn't have wood chippers to generate cheap biomass. And so biomass was expensive to handle, haul, and all that. The little bag of chemical was easier. But by the 1960s, we had tractors with front end loaders. We had chippers. We had black plastic pipe. We had the infrastructure. But in those 20 years, as the innovation of a carbon economy developed, the chemical people took over the land grant universities. They took over everything. And so today, we still suffer under that assumption that the biological approach can't work because it had this head start. It's like there was a race post World War II, and the chemical side had a 1 lap head start, before it started. The fact is that if we had had a Manhattan Project for compost, not only would we have fed the world, we would have done it without 3-legged salamanders, infertile frogs, and a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico.
Interesting. Yeah. I think there's a lot of mythology around what we're supposed to believe is the only way things can be, right? And I want to get just a brief answer from you about this question, and we'll go into some more agriculture questions submitted by some of our listeners and viewers while we have time with you. I know we were limited here, but just to reiterate, with the amount of land that you have, would you be making a lot more profit if you had done the conventional method? I think that's what some people, because ultimately people are going to imitate. They're going to imitate you, or they're going to imitate the standard model of agriculture if they want to get into agriculture, or they're going to do something else. And at the end of the day, people are self-interested. That's why you say capitalist, right? We are self-interested, and people don't want it to be a charity. Most people, they want to make money. So is this something, some folks say, no, if you do it regenerative agriculture, you may make money, but it's going to be hard as can be. It's going to be way more hard work to make the amount of money you could make if you just kind of went in with more of a conventional method, or like you said, factory farming, organic method, like a halfway, in-betweener solution. So can you make more money with, with the conventional approach? And is that something that, for example, could scale again in a country in Africa, or a country in a more developing world? Can they make money in their context doing your method?
The short answer is yes to all the above. You can make more money. You can also be more productive. But here's the caveat. The caveat to that is that it's still business, and we all know. I mean, there have actually been a couple of McDonald's franchises that failed, and so one person takes, for example, what we've done, tries to duplicate it, loses his shirt because maybe he can't sell anything, or he's a poor manager, or he tries to grow too fast. I mean, there's a lot of ways, a lot of creative ways to lose money in business. So I think this is not so much a technique system as much as it's a protocol character thing. But yeah, I would have never been able to be successful on this small farm. I could have never made a living in a commodity business. Never could have done it.
Right. Okay. I got a question from Jefferson Slinkert, a listener. He says, how do we wean ourselves away from GMO crops and still deal with weeds and grasses? As a boy, my father had all of us kids hoeing cotton and soybeans. Can families be taught again how to work that hard?
Yeah, great question. So there's a fascinating development out of Australia called pasture cropping. It's developed by a guy named Colin Seiss, the name is pasture cropping. He even now has a whole streaming curriculum on this. But he's a grain farmer. He's a grain farmer who had a wildfire come through, burned all of his equipment and his buildings and his everything. And after the fire, he said, "Is there a way to grow grain without all this equipment? I don't want to buy it all back." So he began experimenting. This is 20 years ago. And over the years, he's developed and he's got, I don't know what, 3,000 farmers following him in Australia. We've done a little bit of it. Farmers here are now starting to look at it. It's called pasture cropping, where you use animals, in his case, sheep. We've used cows, but where you use an herbivore to weaken an existing sod, an existing perennial pasture for a short period of time to get an annual, whether it's cotton, corn, barley, wheat, oats, whatever it is, to get an annual planted into it. And then, the animals are the herbicide. Okay. So they weaken the sod temporarily, and then you get the annual up ahead of it, and the sod stays there retarded. It's retarded, but it's there underneath. And then when you take the grain crop off, then the grass is there, and it just immediately takes off, and you're up and running. So there are some really, really fantastic techniques now that have been developed in this whole regenerative biological space that are brand new, high technique. And along with that are biostimulants, the field of biostimulants. So that's things like earthworm pea and compost tea and all sorts of really high-tech biostimulants, often that go on as foliar sprays in the stomata of the leaves. Some of them even you're supposed to play calypso Caribbean music to help open up the stomata. But the point is that there are now a tremendous number of really aggressive and fantastic biostimulant kind of transitional things as you go out of chemical fertilizer into a biological approach to help you in that transition. The difference is, in the chemical approach, you have to use more and more every year, or more toxic every year. The beauty of the biological approach is that they bioaccumulate, so you use less and less every year as the biology builds up. And that's a significant difference.
Another listener says they buy grass-fed beef sometimes from the grocery store, but it always tastes dry and like pet food or dog food. And if it's too expensive and it doesn't taste as yummy as the conventional beef, what's the incentive? What's the problem with a lot of the grocery store chain grass-fed beef that people buy? Is it low quality cattle that they're sourcing for that? Is that just the way beef is supposed to taste? I guess it's kind of a general question around that line of thought.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, unfortunately, right now, 80% of the grass-fed beef in America is imported from Australia, and it's very poor quality range type animals. So, my mentor, Alan Nation, who founded Stockman Grass Farmer magazine, always said that probably grass-finished beef, and we use the term grass-finished, not grass-fed. So grass-finished beef is probably as sophisticated as fine wine making. And so being able to grass-finish beef is a very sophisticated procedure with a lot of sophisticated protocols. I do like a 90-minute presentation lecture just on how to have palatable grass finished beef. And it has to be old enough, it has to be fat enough, it has to be big enough, it has to be unstressed from production all the way through to the slaughterhouse. It has to have enough calcium to make.
Why is that important? The non-stress factor.
Non-stress. Oh, yeah. because adrenaline tightens up the connective tissue. So if those animals are stressed at any point, especially right before slaughter, which often happens when you use great big slaughter facilities. And here it is, this animal's been out here somewhere, and the last day of life it spends with a bunch of other different kinds of animals, strange noises, strange places, strange things. And boy, that animal begins to stress. It's like Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin points out that animals live in the moment. They don't have calendars and schedules to keep like you and I do. So they are completely 100% in the moment. And so when their moment changes, they can't sit here and think, okay, this will be over tomorrow. They are completely in the moment. And so their stress level is way higher than ours because they can't reason like we can in a time, in a time sequence. It's quite fascinating.
Does that affect the health, like in terms of, I think it was Ray Pete or somebody was saying something about how if you eat a stressed animal, you can get some of the hormones that are associated with that stress that can be deleterious to your health. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, well, that's a little bit fringy.
Yeah.
But for me, it certainly is intuitive that if we eat animals that experience violence all their lives, that the chances are there will be some of that same whatever violence, whatever that is, it'll be transmitted to us. And so, we think it's really important to have happy animals that are respected and honored, the pigness of the pig, the chickenness of the chicken, because that is what ultimately creates the best eating experience for us in even in the best moral, ethical, spiritual context as well.
Another asks, what does Joel think about old tractors, specifically the Alice Chalmers Model G?
Alice, Ma, those were fantastic tractors. My goodness, they don't make them like that anymore. I think they're great, but I'll tell you what, I love my little 4-wheel drive with a front end loader and hydraulics, man. I mean, that's these modern tractors with all the bells and whistles and hydraulics and stuff, they're pretty amazing too.
And speaking of equipment, question is, the Green New Deal has been pushed here recently. Can electric machinery feed this nation from breaking ground to delivering farm goods over great distances?
That's probably outside my wheelhouse. I'm not an engineer.
Yeah.
I'm certainly fascinated by electricity. I will tell you that one of the most interesting articles I ever read was in Farm Show magazine back in the maybe in the early 80s, and there was a guy who had a windmill on his farm pond to run an electrolysis machine to separate the hydrogen out of the water. And the hydrogen went over to like a propane tank sitting on the bank, and he was running his entire farm, all of his equipment and trucks and tractors on hydrogen. And the reason that it didn't catch on was because you can't compress hydrogen like you can gas. So he had to come back for another tank, like every 2 hours of running, but it was all free, and the exhaust was water. So I'm not sure whether hydrogen, electricity, I don't know where all that is, but what I do think is that if we would let the free market, the market move to where it needs to be, I think that the necessity being the mother of invention, there's a lot of cool work being done on this, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm not an engineer, but I am very fascinated by all these other things. I mean, I ran into a guy that he drives across the country in his pickup truck on wood gas. He fires it with firewood, and he tweaks his carburetor a little bit and runs his truck on wood gas. Maybe that's a solution. I don't know, but anyway, innovation is pretty fascinating, and I'm not an engineer, so I'm not ready to weigh in on that.
You use the F word. You use the F word, free market. That's a scary word for people. So is the imbalance in our agricultural industry, in which small farmers like you are pushed out to the margins, and the conventional factory farms are the ones that are driving all of market power? Is that something that is caused by a free market? Does that make sense
No,
what I'm saying?
boy, that was a load. You didn't twist that one the way I expected, David. No, it's caused by crony capitalism. And so what's happened is that, in 1906, Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, and Teddy Roosevelt, of course, he was a socialist. And the meat lobby cozied up to him and said, hey, we're losing all our business. Sales went down 50% in 6 months after The Jungle came out. He said, we need a government agency to protect us, so that we can get certified as clean, and people will come back to us. So Teddy Roosevelt obliged, gave him the federal, the Food Safety Inspection Service. And at that time, nobody would have thought that here we are, 100 years later, and it would be illegal to, butcher a pig or a chicken or a cow in your backyard and sell it to somebody that you go to church with. And so what's happened is we have now criminalized the consensual choice, and I'm using very loaded terminology here, among consenting adults to be able to determine the fuel for our own bodies. And I say, when the government gets between my lips and my throat, that's an invasion of privacy. And so what we need to do is reopen the opportunity for producer and consumer to engage as consenting adults in choice and free up their entrepreneurial spirit. I run into thousands of farmers all over the world who are ready and willing to take on production and offer pot pies and meat pies and kefir and yogurt to their neighbors in their community. But the food regulations make the hurdles so difficult to entry that small prototype embryos have to be birthed too big to be birthed. That's the tragedy of this. The way you get innovation is to allow embryonic births, and when an embryo is too big to be birthed, you have a dead dream. And so it's time to Uberize the food system. Uber, Airbnb. Who would have guessed 20 years ago that we would have had a completely non-government accredited, non-government certified, free choice option in the travel business, in the hospitality industry, that would operate because of the direct feedback loop of self-monitoring through the democratization of audits, the internet. So what happened is, historically, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker were embedded in the village, and everybody knew who the charlatans were, because everybody talked about the local butcher, baker, and candlestick maker. That became a village certified thing for charlatans and for craft and artisanship. But as we industrialized everything and put razor wire and check-in stations around the industrial complex, we created paranoia because we created ignorance within the society about what was happening inside those gates. And so as culture wanted an industrial scale oversight agency from the government to penetrate that fence on their behalf in that opaque system and certify that what was going on in there was okay. Now, with the internet, with the Uberization of the marketplace, we now have returned to a place of the butcher, baker, and candlestick maker embedded even on the other side of the country, so that when you get a bad piece of meat, you can rate on there, this place is not good, don't go there. And we have real-time feedback loop, which has now made the entire government oversight program completely obsolete and unnecessary, as innovation has run ahead of the industrial government oversight system.
So government solutions are a 20th century solution for a 21st century world that we live in. It's time to go back.
That's exactly right. Well said. That's exactly right.
Snip that thing out of, and send those 20th century models back to where they came from.
Yes,
let's get on with
absolutely
the future.
There's a time and a place for a lot of things, but just because something happens to to serve well in a certain time or place does not mean it necessarily serves well in another time or place. I mean, buggy whips, there's a perfect example.
And it's interesting to me, just on a big picture view, because I do a lot with anthropology. So much of the ancient world and the religious structures of sacrifice that ruled over the ancient world prior to the arrival of Christianity were all about what you could eat and what's clean and unclean, and
Right.
that which was, the good medicine versus the bad medicine. And if you look at it today, our government is powerful because of the war on drugs, the incarceration of whether it's a good thing or not to ingest some of these products. So much of the power of the state is gleaned from this position that it alone can determine what you can put in your mouth or not, whether it's, like you said, food that you want to grow directly and sell to a customer. I tell people it's illegal technically in the state of Florida for a little old lady to make lasagna and serve it at church. If it's not at a food licensed kitchen,
Right.
you're not supposed to be serving that to the public. So that's a crime, and they just don't enforce it. But so much of our government's power comes from this choke point of medicine and nutrition and how those things are going to be monopolized.
Yes.
And that's where all the
Yes.
power comes from, really. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Control the food. Forget now who said it, but control the food, and I can control the world. And that's a big deal. Yes.
I really appreciate your time. We're at our time point where we agreed to. If you could stay with us just a moment, I want to ask you about your faith component. The first description you describe yourself is as a Christian.
Yes.
And so, in conclusion, I want to ask you, how does Jesus inform your farming practices, and what would you say to folks who are in the church, or maybe they're a pastor, and if you could be invited to speak at a Sunday service in America, what would you want them to know the most?
What a great question. So the first thing to understand is that it's not my stuff. None of this is mine. It's all God's stuff. We're simply stewards. And so the question is, if he owns it and it's really his, what does he want to see from it? Does he want to see a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico? Does he want to see gullies? Does he want to see sick people? Does he want to see junk food? And so then the question becomes, is what I assent to in the pew, sitting in the pew, what I say there, is that what's actually showing up on my menu? So, we say we're supposed to treat our neighbor as ourselves, but if I have a factory farm and stink up the neighborhood and pollute the waterway and produce a chicken with superbugs due to subtherapeutic use of antibiotics, is that being kind and good to my neighbor? And so the question is, what is our responsibility as stewards, as caretakers of his earth? And the second part is, how do I take this physical world and use it as an object lesson of spiritual truth, so that when people come to my farm and they spend time here and they leave, I want them to be able to say, oh, so that's what forgiveness looks like. Oh, so that's what abundance looks like. Oh, that's what provision looks like. I want them to be able to say that. The reason for the physical universe is to hang a physical object lesson around these esoteric spiritual things that we sit around in focus groups and talk about. And so that's how we view our greater world, our greater physical world, and our responsibilities within it. And so, yes, it does matter. I ask, does God care whether we use styrofoam, paper, or some salvage plates from down at the Salvation Army? Does God care? Does God care if at the church potluck we have Kentucky Fried Chicken or chicken produced, on a local farm that we actually have a relationship with? Is God fundamentally relational, or is he anti-relational, like our segregated food system? So I wrote a book, The Marvelous Pigness of Pigs, which articulates all of these ethics for the Christian community as we interact with our world, and food, of course, is one of the most intimate ways we interact with our world. And the question is what I'm eating, is my food today, is that healing in the spiritual divine sense, is that a healing thing or a hurting thing? And make and actually think about those things with intention.
Is that how you think the kingdom of God comes to earth, is doing this kind of thing where we go back to small communities and small farms and not using government coercion to solve all of our problems? Maybe it looks a little like that.
I do think it looks a little bit like that. In fact, I think it's interesting that in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus prays, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done," and the more I have thought about that, I would ask, why did Jesus pray that? I mean, he can do anything he wants to. Why would he have to ask, "Your kingdom come, your will be done"? Well, the reason is because most of the time his will is not being done, and his kingdom has not come here. And so Jesus was asking for something that wasn't occurring. Your kingdom come, God, your will be done, God. He was asking for something that wasn't being done. It wasn't being done then, and it's not being done now. How can I be a part of bringing his will and his kingdom to the earth? And part of that certainly is through stewardship, through his creation, his object lesson that showed his object lesson of showing his provision, care, and mercy toward us. Look, I have given you chlorophyll. I have given you a sun in the sky to grow green material and can feed a cow and feed you. All of that is wrapped up in this provision. And so he surrounds us in this wonderful nest of provision, and wants us to not only partake of it, but participate as stewards and caretakers in that provision. We are his hands, his feet, his intellect, as we interact with this nest that he's provided for us, and we should do it with intention and serious responsibility. It's a great honor to be able to be in that position. It's also a great responsibility and privilege.
Well, that's different. Most Christians in America seem to think that the end of the world, or where we're headed, is like Vietnam. We're just on the rooftops waiting for the helicopters to pick up the survivors.
Right.
You think that would seem to suggest that thy kingdom never came. But do you believe that's likely, or do you believe that Jesus will be successful in saving the world in history, not necessarily in our time, but do you think history moves in that direction?
Oh, well, there's no question in my mind that he will ultimately, he's going to create a new heaven and a new earth. He's going to reign, and I don't know what all that looks like. To me, it's just enough to think about being able to live in eternity and not get bored. That's enough for my imagination. I can't even imagine, living forever and not getting bored. So it's going to be an exciting thing. It's going to be an exciting existence, exciting life. And whether it looks more like the earth or less like the earth, or what it is, I'm not, I don't mind, but his challenge is to occupy till I come. And so my responsibility, I don't need to know all the ins and outs of how it's all going to shake down at the end, but I am absolutely convinced that he does care whether we make a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico, whether I have soil erosion or building erosion, whether I'm desertifying my landscape or hydrating my landscape, whether I'm encouraging disease or or encouraging health. I think he's very interested in all of those things, and that's enough for me for now.
Very good. I really appreciate your time, Joel Salatin. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, David.
And I want people to visit your website, thelunaticfarmer.com, where you can read your blog and all the other content you have available. So thanks again.
Thank you.